In 1962, a steelworker in Pittsburgh came home from a 10-hour shift to a hot dinner on the table every single night of the week. His wife had spent less than 60 cents on it. Not on that night specifically. Every night. 6 nights a week, 50 weeks a year, on a grocery budget that modern families would find impossible to imagine feeding one person on, let alone 6. Number 16 on this list was so common in working-class neighborhoods across the country that sociologists studying American eating habits in 1965 found it on the table in more than 40% of the households they surveyed. Yet most people under 50 have never eaten it. Number 9 was recommended by the USDA as a model of affordable nutrition and distributed in pamphlets to low-income families across 12 states. And number 1, the dinner that appeared on more American tables on more ordinary weeknights between 1958 and 1968 than any other single dish the decade produced, has been so completely replaced by fast food and frozen meals that the recipe itself is nearly gone. These 20 dinners did not come from restaurants. They came from kitchens where a woman understood exactly what her family needed and exactly what the budget allowed, and produced something hot and nourishing and genuinely satisfying from the intersection of those two facts every single night, without complaint and without recognition. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 20 forgotten poor man dinners from the 1960s we ate every night before restaurants got cheap. Number 20. Creamed chipped beef over rice, a dinner version not over toast. Served over white rice to stretch the protein and make it a proper dinner rather than a quick meal. Dried beef torn into rough pieces is stirred into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, seasoned with black pepper and sometimes a pinch of garlic powder, then poured hot over a bowl of long-grain white rice. A jar of dried chipped beef cost about 35 cents in 1962. The rice was pennies. The butter, flour, and milk were pantry staples that cost almost nothing per serving. The whole dinner fed a family of 5 for under 50 cents, and came together in 12 minutes on the nights when 12 minutes was all the evening had available. Veterans who had eaten the military version of this dish for years brought it home as an instinct rather than a recipe. Their wives made it without consulting anything, because the ingredients told you what to do. Number 19. Pork and beans with fried salt pork. A can of pork and beans was heated through in a saucepan, while thick slices of salt pork were fried in a cast-iron skillet until the fat rendered crisp and the lean edges turned deep brown and slightly charred. The salt pork came out, and the beans went into the same skillet for the last 2 minutes, absorbing the rendered fat and the caramelized bits from the bottom of the pan. Everything was plated together with cornbread baked while the pork fried. A can of pork and beans cost 12 cents in 1962. A pound of salt pork was about 15 cents. This dinner fed a family of 4 for under 30 cents, and produced something that tasted of smoke and sweetness and fat in a combination that no modern convenience food has ever replicated. Church cookbooks across the South listed it as a standard weeknight entry because everyone already knew how to make it and nobody needed measurements. Number 18. Macaroni and tomato with ground beef. Ground beef is browned in a pot with a diced onion. A can of whole peeled tomatoes is broken up by hand and stirred in. Then a box of elbow macaroni is cooked directly in the same one pot, with enough water added to cook the pasta through and absorb into the sauce. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder finish it. 15 minutes from cold stove to full plates. Ground beef cost 43 cents a pound in 1962. A box of macaroni was 9 cents. A can of tomatoes was 12 cents. The whole pot fed 5 people for under 75 cents and tasted better the next day, reheated for lunch when the sauce had soaked deeper into the pasta overnight. This was American goulash wearing a borrowed name, and it kept millions of families fed through the decade without anyone thinking to celebrate it. Number 17. Chicken backs and rice. Chicken backs and necks sold for about 19 cents a pound in 1962 because Americans had convinced themselves that boneless white meat was superior and that anything attached to a small bone was beneath consideration. Women who had cooked through harder times knew better. Those bony pieces, simmered for an hour in water with onion, celery, and salt, produced a broth of extraordinary richness, deep gold, and deeply flavored. The bones came out, the meat was pulled from them in small shreds and returned to the pot. A cup of raw white rice was dropped directly into the simmering broth. 20 minutes later, the rice had absorbed every molecule of chicken flavor that had dissolved into the liquid over that hour. The finished pot was not quite soup and not quite casserole, something in between that fed a family of 6 for under 30 cents. We stopped buying chicken backs when boneless breasts went on sale, and picking meat from small bones began to feel like more effort than it was worth. The flavor that lived in those bones was worth every bit of that worth. Number 16. Salmon patties with white gravy. A can of pink salmon, drained with the larger bones removed, mashed with a cracker or two, mixed with a beaten egg, diced onion, and a spoonful of mustard, formed into patties and fried in a skillet until golden on both sides. The patties were moved aside, and into the same skillet went a spoonful of flour, stirred into the drippings, then milk added slowly until a pale, creamy gravy formed. Everything was returned to the pan, covered for 5 minutes, served over white rice or with white bread alongside. A can of salmon cost about 25 cents in 1962. This dinner fed a family of 4 for under 40 cents. Children who said they disliked fish ate salmon patties without a second thought because the crust and the gravy together tasted like nothing anyone would refuse. The recipe lived in every women's club cookbook from 1955 to 1975, and then faded when canned tuna became cheaper and salmon became something ordered at restaurants. Here is something worth understanding about the 1960s dinner table that modern food culture has entirely missed. The women who made these meals were not cooking from a position of limitation. They were cooking from a position of mastery. The difference matters. A woman who is limited by her budget produces something constrained and apologetic. A woman who has mastered the art of feeding 6 people on 60 cents produces something that tastes like confidence. The meals on this list tasted like confidence. They tasted like someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had been doing it long enough that the knowledge had moved from the mind into the hands. The specific sizzle of the fat that told you the pan was ready. The color of the roux that told you the flour had cooked through. The sound the beans made against the wooden spoon when they needed 5 more minutes. None of that was written down. All of it was known. When that knowledge stopped being transmitted because the next generation had access to restaurant meals and frozen dinners and did not need it, it did not move anywhere. It simply stopped existing. What we are left with now are the ingredients and the instructions and none of the intuition. The intuition was the whole thing. Number 15. Ham and navy bean soup. A leftover ham bone from Sunday's dinner, a pound of navy beans soaked overnight, a diced onion, 2 stalks of celery, a bay leaf, and enough water to cover everything by 3 inches. The pot went on the back burner at the lowest flame the stove could manage and stayed there all day while whatever else needed doing got done. By supper, the beans had dissolved at their edges and thickened the broth into something silky and smoky and deeply savory that tasted nothing like anything from a can. The ham bone was already paid for with Sunday's dinner. The beans cost about 10 cents a pound. This pot fed a family of 6 for 2 full days and asked nothing of the cook except the patience to plan the night before. We have replaced it with Campbell's split pea at $1.69 a serving and called that progress. Number 14. Fried liver with onions and mashed potatoes. Beef liver cost about 29 cents a pound in 1962 because Americans who could afford beefsteak refused it. That meant there was always plenty for the families who could not. Sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and cooked in a hot cast-iron skillet for exactly 2 minutes per side, while caramelized onions finished in a second pan. Done right, with the inside still faintly pink, it was mild and rich and deeply satisfying. Done wrong, cooked too long in the pan, it became the bitter, tough thing a generation grew up hating. The mashed potatoes made from scratch alongside absorbed the pan juices from the liver, with the sweet onions piled on top. A complete dinner for a family of 5 for under $1. The nutrition was extraordinary. The reputation was not. Both are accurate. Number 13. Hot dog and bean casserole. Hot dogs sliced into coins, 2 cans of pork and beans, a spoonful of brown sugar, a squirt of yellow mustard, and a splash of Worcestershire, stirred together in a baking dish and baked at 325 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes, until the sauce thickened and the hot dog slices had slightly crisped at their edges, and the whole dish smelled of smoke and sweetness from across the house. A package of hot dogs cost about 49 cents in 1962. 2 cans of beans were 24 cents. This dinner fed a family of 6 for under $1 and produced something that children considered a genuine treat rather than a budget meal, which was the specific genius of combining 2 inexpensive ingredients in a way that tasted like neither of them alone. Mothers who made this every other Tuesday did not apologize for it. Their children asked for it by name. Number 12. Pinto beans and fried cornbread. Slow-simmered pinto beans began with a bag of dried pinto beans soaked overnight, placed in a pot with a ham hock or a strip of salt pork, covered with water, and simmered unattended for 3 to 4 hours while the afternoon happened around it. By supper, the beans had broken at their edges and thickened the broth into something dark, savory, and smoky. The cornbread was fried in a cast-iron skillet rather than baked, thin rounds of cornmeal batter cooked in bacon grease until the edges went crisp and the centers stayed soft, and then crumbled directly into the bowl alongside the beans. A pound of dried pintos cost about 12 cents in 1962. This dinner fed a family of 6 for under 50 cents, and it provided complete protein from the combination of beans and cornmeal that those families understood through practice without any nutritional science to confirm it. The moment those families could afford to eat something else, most of them did. The pinto beans went with the poverty they had worked so hard to leave behind. Here is what the fast food industry did to the American weeknight dinner between 1960 and 1980, and why the disappearance of the meals on this list happened so completely and so quickly. McDonald's had 228 locations in 1960 and over 3,000 by 1970. That expansion did not happen in wealthy neighborhoods where families were already eating at sit-down restaurants. It happened in working-class neighborhoods where the alternative was cooking from scratch every night. The pitch was not that McDonald's was better than home cooking. The pitch was that it was faster, that a mother who had worked all day deserved a break, that feeding her family from a paper bag was a form of modern progress rather than an abandonment of something that had taken generations to build. The pitch worked because the exhaustion was real and the offer was genuine, and nobody thought to calculate what was being traded away. What was being traded away was the specific knowledge of how to feed 6 people on 60 cents. That knowledge, once lost, does not come back from a drive-through window. Number 11. Stuffed green peppers. Bell peppers were halved and seeded, then filled with a mixture of browned ground beef, cooked white rice, and diced onion, with a can of crushed tomatoes, salt, and pepper. The peppers were set upright in a baking dish with a little tomato juice in the bottom, covered with foil, and baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes, until the peppers softened and the filling swelled the rolls from the inside. The rice doubled the volume of the meat for almost nothing. Every forkful had something different happening. Ground beef cost 43 cents a pound. Bell peppers were a nickel each at the roadside market in summer. The whole dinner cost under $1 and looked like genuine effort on the table. Mothers across Ohio and Indiana made this every other week with the reliability of a calendar. It disappeared not because it stopped working, but because the generation that made it reflexively forgot to teach the next one. Number 10. Tuna noodle skillet. Not the casserole version baked in the oven. The faster stovetop version for the nights when 45 minutes of oven time was more than the evening could manage. Egg noodles boiled and drained, a can of tuna drained and broken apart, a can of cream of mushroom soup thinned with a little milk, a handful of frozen peas, everything combined in a skillet over medium heat and stirred until the sauce heated through and coated every noodle completely. 10 minutes from cold stove to full plates. A can of tuna was about 29 cents in 1962. The soup was 12 cents. The noodles were 9 cents. This dinner cost under 60 cents for a family of 5 and appeared on tables every Wednesday with the predictability of the week itself. Children ate it without complaint. Mothers made it without consulting anything. It was simply what Wednesday was. Number 9. Beef and potato hash. Leftover roast beef or corned beef, diced small, an equal volume of diced cooked potatoes, a diced onion, salt, pepper, and a spoonful of bacon grease go into a hot cast iron skillet. Everything was pressed flat with the back of the spatula and left to cook without stirring on medium heat for 8 minutes, until the bottom formed a crust. It was then turned in sections and pressed flat again for another 6 minutes, until the second side crisped. A fried EGG was placed on top of each serving, directly from the same pan. The hash was the second dinner from a roast already purchased and already eaten, the dividend paid by wasting nothing. It cost the price of the onion and the eggs. The rest was already paid for. Families who made this every Monday after Sunday's roast were doubling the value of every piece of meat they bought. That practice, automatic and unsentimental, produced some of the best meals of the decade from the ingredients that everyone else was throwing away. Number 8. Smothered chicken with rice. Chicken pieces, legs, and thighs, because they were cheaper and more flavorful than breasts, were dredged in seasoned flour and browned in a heavy skillet until deep golden on all sides. The pieces were removed while a gravy was built in the same pan from the drippings. More flour was stirred in, chicken broth was added slowly, and everything was brought to a simmer. The chicken returned to the gravy, it was covered, and it simmered on the lowest flame for 35 minutes until the meat was falling off the bone and the gravy had absorbed the flavor of the chicken completely. It was served over white rice with the gravy poured over everything. Chicken legs cost about 15 cents a pound in 1962. This dinner fed a family of 5 for under $1, and it produced a gravy so good that the rice was a vehicle for it rather than a component of the meal. Smothered chicken is still made in southern kitchens. It has nearly disappeared everywhere else. Number 7. Fried potatoes and eggs. A cast iron skillet, 3 potatoes sliced thin, half an onion diced, and a spoonful of bacon grease. Cook patiently over low heat until the potatoes turn golden and the onions become sweet and soft. Then crack 2 or 3 eggs directly into the skillet beside the potatoes and cook until the whites set while the yolks stay runny. Salt and pepper at the table. This was supper in thousands of working-class kitchens across the rural South and the Midwest throughout the 1960s. It asked almost nothing of the cook except the willingness to stand at the stove for 20 minutes and the knowledge that low heat was the whole secret. For a family managing a budget that had run out before the week did, fried potatoes and eggs was not a last resort. It was a solution. It cost under 30 cents for a family of 4 and left no one at the table feeling they had received less than they deserved. Number 6. Vegetable beef soup made from leftover bones. A soup bone or the remains of any roasted meat was covered with cold water and slowly brought to a simmer with onion, celery, carrot, and salt. It simmered for 2 hours, until the broth had given everything the bones could offer. Then, whatever vegetables in the refrigerator were heading toward unusable were added. Carrots softening at the tips, celery going limp, a potato with eyes starting to show, a can of tomatoes. They went into the strained broth and simmered 30 minutes more. A meal that cost almost nothing, because every ingredient was either free in the case of the bones or about to be wasted in the case of the vegetables. For a household that understood economy, this soup was not a budget measure. It was the correct use of everything the kitchen held. It produced something so deeply savory from ingredients everyone else was discarding that making it felt like a kind of alchemy. It still does. Most people have simply stopped practicing it. There is a specific arithmetic that governed the 1960s working-class dinner table, and most people alive today have never had to practice it. That arithmetic was simple. The grocery budget for the week was fixed on payday, and it did not expand regardless of what the week brought. The family was a fixed number of people who needed to eat a fixed number of times. The dinners had to be filling enough to sustain bodies doing physical work or growing children. Nothing could be wasted, because waste was money that had already been spent and was not coming back. The women who operated within this arithmetic every week for 20 years did not experience it as constraint. They experienced it as competence. The ability to work within it, without producing meals that felt like punishment, was the whole skill. The meals on this list were not the product of limitation. They were the product of that competence expressed at its highest level. The proof that a woman who knew what she was doing could feed 6 people well on 60 cents and make it look like it had never been a question. Number 5. Cabbage and sausage with cornbread. A head of green cabbage, roughly chopped, 2 or 3 smoked sausage links sliced into thick coins, an onion, a can of diced tomatoes, and enough water to make it a stew rather than a dry sauté. Put everything into a pot and simmer for 45 minutes until the cabbage goes silky and sweet and the sausage perfumes the entire kitchen with garlic and smoke. A head of cabbage cost about 15 cents in 1962 and fed a family of 6 with 3 days of leftovers. Smoked sausage kept in the refrigerator for 2 weeks without spoiling, which made it the ideal protein for the days when the shopping had not happened yet and the refrigerator held only what had been there since last week. The cornbread baked in the cast iron skillet while the stew finished. This dinner cost under 40 cents and required almost no knife work, which mattered on evenings when the cook had been on her feet since 6 in the morning and the evening had already asked too much. Number 4. Red beans and rice. A pound of dried red kidney beans, a smoked sausage link, an onion, a green pepper, a stalk of celery. Into the pot in the morning on the lowest possible heat. Come back at 5. The beans had done their own work all day without any assistance. They were creamy and broken slightly at their edges, and the sausage had surrendered its smoke and fat to the broth. The whole pot tasted of something that would have required far more effort than setting it on the stove in the morning and walking away. For a woman whose energy was highest before noon and who needed dinner to be finished before she needed to be somewhere else in the afternoon, this was the meal that solved Tuesday. The beans cost almost nothing. The sausage cost almost nothing. Together they produced something that fed a family of 6 for under $1 and tasted like someone had been cooking it all day. Someone had. It just had not required any attention. Number 3. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. Ground beef is browned in a cast iron skillet with a diced onion. A spoonful of flour is stirred in to coat the meat, and milk is poured in slowly until everything bubbles into a thick, savory gravy. It is poured over mashed potatoes made from scratch with butter, warm milk, and salt, left with a well in the center for the gravy to pool in. Farmers called it poor man's steak. Mothers called it hamburger gravy. Children ate 2 helpings without prompting. Ground beef cost 43 cents a pound in 1962. A 5-pound bag of potatoes was 29 cents. This fed a family of 6 for under $2 and appeared on dinner tables from Montana to Georgia with the reliability of Monday itself. The gravy soaked into the potatoes so that every forkful carried both together, the richness of the beef and the comfort of the starch, inseparable from each other. It has been almost entirely replaced by Hamburger Helper from a box that costs twice as much and tastes like the box it came in. Number 2. Split pea soup with ham and cornbread. A bag of dried green split peas, a leftover ham bone, an onion, a carrot, a bay leaf, and enough water to cover everything. Left on the back burner for 2 hours without stirring or checking. The peas dissolved and thickened the water into something pale, earthy, and dense that needed no flour, no cream, and no technique beyond the patience to leave it alone. The ham bone released smokiness and collagen into the liquid over those 2 hours in a way that no amount of bouillon could replicate. One batch fed a family of 5 for 2 days on about 30 cents of ingredients. The cornbread baked in the cast iron skillet and was eaten alongside, dragged through the soup. It appeared in every budget cookbook of the decade and in every government nutrition pamphlet aimed at low-income families. And then it was replaced by something from a can that costs $1.69 a serving and tastes like a polite suggestion of what soup could be rather than soup itself. Number 1. Pinto beans and cornbread. Not a regional variation with a food magazine backstory, just beans. Whatever was in the bag soaked the night before. Pinto beans in Kentucky, navy beans in Ohio, black-eyed peas in Georgia. A pound of whatever was available, placed in a pot with water and salt and a ham hock or a strip of salt pork or a piece of fatback, simmered without attention for 3 to 4 hours while the family did everything else the evening required. By the time supper was called, the beans had broken at their edges and thickened the water into a broth that tasted of cured pork, of starch, and of the long afternoon of low heat. The cornbread baked in the cast iron skillet crumbled directly into the bowl. A pound of dried beans cost 12 cents in 1962 and fed a family of 6 for 2 days. It provided complete protein, complex carbohydrates, and enough warmth to make a quiet kitchen feel less quiet for the 20 minutes it took to eat. There was nothing to photograph, nothing to post, nothing to brag about. There was only a full belly and the knowledge that you had fed your family today and could do it again tomorrow. For the women who made this dinner every week for 20 years while restaurants got cheaper and frozen meals got more convenient and the world slowly stopped expecting anyone to cook from scratch, that knowledge was not a small thing. It was the whole thing. Make one of these this week. Make the hamburger gravy if ground beef is on sale. Make the split pea soup if there is a ham bone in the freezer. Make the pinto beans on a Sunday when there is nowhere to be and the afternoon is long and quiet. Then sit down at the table. Set a place. Eat it slow. Because these dinners were never just about being cheap. They were about the specific competence of feeding people well with almost nothing. A competence that took decades to build and 1 generation to lose. Tell me in the comments which one your mother made every week and whether you still make it yourself. Because these were not just dinners. They were proof that the simplest food, cooked by the most careful hands, is still the best food anyone has ever eaten at an American table.